Hi there, it's Mark and welcome to episode 4 of Adobe Photoshop for Photographers, our series of video tutorials designed to improve your Photoshop skills with a photography bias. Last week we started to look at photo retouching with dodging and burning, and this week we're going to continue that by looking at frequency separation, which I might have previously mentioned is a stupid name for a great technique. Well, naming aside, it is a great technique, and we'll do one or two examples today to really cement our understanding of how it works before we then look at tone curves and various gradients. So that's what we have in store today. Now, all the images we used today are available from our website, and there's a link down in the notes below the video. You may need to click on the thing which says show more to display all of the notes. Press pause, go and collect those, and when you press play again, we'll play the titles and we'll crack on. But before you do, there is something important to tell you. That is that today subscribing is absolutely free. You can click that subscribe button, and once more, it's also free to click on the bell button to be notified of future episodes, and you get a feel-good factor from giving this a thumbs up, as well as the ability to ask all and any questions about the series in the comments below, and I will answer them all for you. It's that simple. You'll feel good, and I get some more subscribers. Bonus! See you shortly. Let's get straight in to frequency separation. What is it separating? It is separating color from texture. So we will have a layer with which we can play with color, which is good in portraits for blemishes and the like, and there's a layer where we will have texture, which again for portraits would be good for the likes of wrinkles. So we've got to set this picture up in a style whereby we can isolate those two features of this picture. So we'll need two copies, so Command J on a Mac, Control J on a PC to get out two copies. I'm going to call one of them texture, cunningly named, and the next one color. Press enter. And then what I need is another layer to play with in the middle. So I'm on my color. I'm going to click on my new layer icon, and I'm going to call this one retouch. And they're the three layers we are going to use. Now it's important when you follow along that you actually have them in this order for this to work. So color. Let's switch these off for now. How do we get rid of the texture from this picture? And the answer to that is blur. So let's go to filter, blur, gaussian blur, leave preview on, and you're trying to find a level of blur where you don't see as much of the actual texture, and you don't want it too extreme where you can hardly make out anything. So somewhere in here, and I think about 34 seems about okay. Yeah, we'll keep it about 33, 35, around mid 30s possibly. And here you can see a lot of the texture is gone, but we retain all the color. So let's just go with that. And let's bring texture back into play. How do we remove all the color, or how do we subtract all the color? There is a blend mode called subtract. But first we need to apply image. Apply image is a technique in Photoshop that allows you to apply one image on top of another, or in this case one layer on top of another, and it's found up here in image, apply image. Now the dialog box here lets you choose which image you want to apply on top of the currently selected layer. So we want the one called color. We also want to make sure, if yours doesn't say subtract already, choose subtract. Mine says subtract already because I've used this before and it's remembered what I've used. The other thing it's remembered what I've used is the scale 2 and the offset of 128. Now that is very important. Colors are given a value of 0 through to 256. I had to pause to do my maths there. And 128 is exactly halfway, so it's important that that is 128 and all the others as seen. Click OK. Finally, this layer that we've just done the apply image to, we need to change to a blend mode called linear light. And that is our setup complete. Now what always amazes me with this, and it shouldn't after the years I've been doing Photoshop, is we are looking down through the layer stack here. We're seeing this, what looks like a completely grey layer. We're going to ignore that one, it's not switched on. And then we're seeing this layer which we know to be blurred. And yet we're seeing the entire original picture, and it's not coming from the background layer. If I switch that off, we've got two completely different looking layers. We know that to be totally blurred, and well, just look at that one. And yet we're seeing exactly the same picture. That tells us that we've actually managed to separate the two items, and we're seeing them blended back together. So we can crack on. We don't need the background layer now. We'll just leave it switched off. So we can use this layer to play with texture, and we can use this layer to play with color, and that's what we're going to do. But first, I'm going to prove to ourselves that these do isolate those two aspects. If I go to the color layer and I choose our patch tool, we met the patch tool in a previous video for moving elements around and the various ways it will react. I'll link to that one above. I'm on the color layer. I'm going to draw a patch of this blue, and I'm going to move that blue. And because I'm on the color layer, you can see it has actually patched it over to where we were before. Control Z to bring that back. If I now go to the texture layer and I've got my patch in exactly the same place and I move that, it doesn't do anything, or doesn't appear to do anything because there's no texture there. Control D. Let's do that in the other way around. Let's take this rich texture we've got here. I'm on the texture layer, and let's move that out. What we've done is we've taken the texture from here and placed it here. So all the color is the same. We haven't changed the color of the underlying face, but we've taken the texture from here and put it back. Control D, Control Z. Okay, so we've shown that we can move texture around independent of color and color around independent of texture. And that, my friends, is what we're going to do. So texture, still got my patch tool on. And let us take this wrinkle and just move it just ever so slightly, because we still want some of the nearby texture to be used. Control D, and we've got rid of that wrinkle. Incidentally, when it does come to photo retouching, I think anything such as spots, dry skin, things like that are all absolutely fair game. Anything that might not be there next week, anything that only appeared yesterday, it's all fair game. But things like birthmarks, beauty spots and the like, unless I was asked to do that, I wouldn't consider that part of something I do in retouching. It's all part of life's rich tapestry and what makes all of us unique. So let's crack on. Let's just take that blemish out of the way. And let's go for another wrinkle, shall we? Now then, I want to leave the texture here, but I want to brighten some of the under the eye. So in that case, I swap over to my retouch layer. Switch it on would help. B for my brush tool. I want a soft brush, so not hard, down this end, soft. I want the flow to be very low, single digits. What's flow? Well, I have a video on flow and opacity, which I'll link to above now, but essentially think of it the amount of paint. Think of it as the amount of paint you actually put on a brush. If you've got lots of paint on a brush and you start painting a wall, lots of paint goes on the wall. If you hardly put any paint on, there's less flow of paint, so not much paint goes on. However, you can paint over it twice, 3 times, 4 times, and each time you can successively increase the amount of paint so it's optimal, rather than 100% where it's harder to take the paint off. So you build up slowly with a low flow. So I've got my brush, B from my brush tool. I now need to paint on the retouch, sampling the colours from elsewhere. I want to brighten this, so I'm going to use some of the brightness that's in his cheek to just put under his eye. So I want to hold down my Option key or Alt key on a PC to get my little eyedropper up, and I can sample the colour. And before I do that, if you look, I've got over here white as my foreground colour. Once I sample that, it puts that colour as my foreground colour, and that's what my brush has now been loaded with. I will now just paint using that colour under his eye, like so. And I'm going to sample here, because this side of the face does seem a bit redder. I just want to use that to try and take out some of the colour here. And I'm not adjusting the texture at all. And once more, I've used colours from the actual picture in the vicinity of, so it all works out quite well. And that's frequency separation, or rather the separation of colour and texture, and together with dodging and burning form a real rich set of tools to sculpt portraits. Dodging and burning helped add a bit of form, a bit of structure, a bit of sculpting. Frequency separation helps us remove little imperfections such as the odd spot and such. How much and how little you use them is up to you, but really is less is more. If you want a little bit of homework, press pause now and continue on taking out some more of the wrinkles. And what I would advise though is redoing the setup. Let's just quickly do it now. Get rid of these 3 layers. Highlight the top one, hold down my shift click on the bottom one, press my delete key. And let's just go through that again. We wanted 2 copies, Control J, Control J. Want to call one texture. Want to call one color. We want to stick a layer in between, which I'm going to call retouch. We want to go to our color layer. We want to blur it. Now, in this case, blur will remember the previous setting, but don't rely on that. Attune to what you think looks best. Then we brought back in the texture and we went image, apply image. Now it remembers our previous settings, but it's important to pick the layer that we made our color change on, our blur on. Subtract 2128, click OK, and drop that into linear light. Background layer off, retouch layer on, and we're ready to go. Now yes, I've done this a few times and it was easy for me to run through that, but it's not complicated, it's just methodical. Okay, press pause, I've reset the canvas for you, and have a practice. In fact, go and have a cup of tea and then have a practice. Have they gone? Right, while they're getting the tea, if I can just see if I can reach down, get the keyboard, click on subscribe, done. They'll never notice. Better run. And so here's the picture we're going to be using to demonstrate curves, taken at a motocross day out. Total disregard to my personal safety, but I got some great pictures. Anyway, curves lives down in the adjustment layer toolset, which is down here. We've seen it before, and we'll be seeing it again as the series progresses. Very quick recap. Blacks are at this end, whites are at this end. The curve in the middle goes through black, shadow, mid-tone, highlight and white, and we can wriggle this to darken or lighten within any one of those bands or bands. You can add as many points as you like on the curve to adjust things, and you can also play with individual color channels, but we'll come back to all that. This is our little reset button. Reset. One of the things I like about the curves and similar tools is you don't need to understand the graphs and exactly what you're changing here. You can do it all just by studying the picture, and that can be very useful because it's got an eyedropper. If we click there, our cursor is now an eyedropper. So if I wanted to darken or lighten a particular tone on this picture, rather than necessarily work out where it is on this line. If you watch that line, by the way, though, I'm in the lights, so it's high. If I pass through the cycle, it should come right down. So that's telling us where it is, but I don't need to know where it is with this eyedropper. I can actually just click, hold, and drag up to brighten, or drag down to darken at any one particular part. Now the disadvantage here is when I'm lightening this cyclist, I'm lightening everything. As you can see, the whole curve's followed it, but I've still got my eyedropper. So if I click in the highlights of the sky, somewhere right there, I can start to bring that back. So I'm just eyeballing this and deciding what I want to be lighter and what I want to be darker, and clicking accordingly and making my adjustment. And that's better. Would I have come up with that design had I just been working over here, clicking and dragging? Probably not. Would I have known that that would have this effect? Definitely not. But I'm just going by what I'm seeing on screen. Okay, let's reset that again and look at color channels. Red. Does this darken the red and lighten the red? No. Does it add red and take red away? Yes. When you take away red, you introduce cyan. It's opposite in the color wheel. So reds and cyans are linked, and we saw this previously when we looked at the color balance adjustment layer. If I take this above the line, I'm increasing the reds, and instantly that's where I want to go. I think I rather like that look on this particular one. But let's have a look at greens. So if I add green by taking the line up, if I go to remove green, I'm actually adding magenta. And I think I do want a tiny little bit of magenta in there. Sorry, I'm editing this as I'm actually explaining as well. So, and let's go for blue. So blue above the line adds blues. Below the line adds yellows. That's opposite on the color wheel. And so you move back and forward between those two. And what I like about using a curve to do this as opposed to our color balance tool is that I feel I've got more control on exactly where I want to make that change. So I made that blue change somewhere in the middle. I could equally have actually brought it into, get those yellows into the real darks, and then just restore the balance higher up. So before and after. Quite subtle changes, but it can dramatically change the look of a picture. Fundamentally, that's our curve, and because it's an adjustment layer, it comes with a mask, and if we want to take out the effect of the curve on the picture, B for a brush tool, D for default colors, X to get black as a foreground color, and let's not forget to bring a flow back up because we had it all the way down for the previous exercise. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, and I'm actually going to use that to take some of that yellow cast out of the actual cyclist himself. There, you can see that, and then switch on and off all changes bar that cyclist, and that's how you'd use that. The other thing to consider with these tools is that they come with some presets, and it's worth using the presets to learn. My first venture into a curve, let's put a new one on, switch that one off because I actually want to keep that. My new venture into a curve, and I want to add a high contrast. Well, under the preset there's a strong contrast. Not only does it do that, I don't like that effect by the way, but not only does it do that, I can now see that that is this sort of shape to affect that sort of change. What about just making something generally darker? Here we've just used a mid-tone area, single point, and we've swept it down. Incidentally, you may have noticed there's negative and color negatives in here as well. Let's see what negative does. Negative looks like it's just swapped that diagonal the other way. In fact, let's do that. Let's move this one down, click and drag that one up. In fact, yes, that's exactly what it's done. So to make a negative for this, down and up. To make a color negative, it has done similar with the individual color bands, red, green and blue, as you can see there. So if we go to red, you can see what it's done there. It's not exactly swapped the diagonal, green and blue. But why is that important? Well, I know people who've got old school negatives from more traditional analog days of photography, and they want to bring them into the digital world. So they scan or even photograph the negative. Of course, that's no good to us, but hold on, we've got a curve tool here that can make this a color negative. So if we actually had a color negative and we did that, it would make it to a positive or a correctly viewed color that we'd expect. So it's one way of using a layer in Photoshop to help you if you're looking at converting negatives into digital pictures. Let's click reset and look at another feature here, and that is these three droppers. That represents our white point, that's our black point, and that's our grey point. You can use these to dictate what is the black point, white point, and midpoint in your picture. Let's click on the black dropper. Now, the darkest part of this picture is probably here in this Marshall's trouser, or possibly in here. 6 2/3. I know it's not black, pure black, because the histogram shows there's a gap here. There's no actual pure black in the picture, just as there's no pure white, but there's an awful lot of highlights. So if I click here, I'm telling Photoshop that is to be my black reference, and it'll drag everything accordingly down and darken the picture. If I wanted to artificially brighten the picture in this one, I would say white point and pick my whitest point, which by eye I think is probably there. And I know it's not white, you can see it on the histogram, so it'll drag everything up. And so I can actually artificially manipulate the black point, white point, and so on. I can double click on the dropper and it comes up. Notice this is currently set at 50% grey. I can actually say that I want that grey point to be there. Arbitrarily moved it across so that I've introduced some reds to it. I don't want to save as the new defaults, but I've got it primed now, so if I click somewhere to be grey, it adds that cast into it. So we're now starting to move away from just traditional tones in terms of contrasts, but we've got this ability to put colours into our pictures. Okay, I chose that because I knew it would dramatically show up. So let's be a bit more subtle now. Let's reset this curve. Let's go to our double click on our black dropper. Now, just a word of caution, this you need not to be here, you need to be on the tool. So double click on our black, and I want to find a purple, and I want to introduce a bit of purple in there. I'm doing a comparison here just to see how much it's creeping through. Right, I've now I've now primed the black to still be very dark, but also to contain some purples, and I'm going to click in here and I've started to put a purple cast on there. In my highlights, I'm actually going to put a slight yellow. I'm going to keep it quite high and just introduce a bit of a yellow, something like that. Click no to save as defaults. Find my high point in the cloud somewhere and click, and I introduced a yellow. In my mids, did I say I was going to be subtle here? I'm clearly not. I'm putting some blues into the mids. Click no, find my midpoint there. And so now I'm effectively starting to color grade, and we'll be covering a lot more on color grades in future episodes. So the curve is very versatile. It allows you to change tonal values in red, green and blue, and therefore also in cyan, magenta and yellow. It allows you to add contrast, take contrast away, and it allows you to color grade. And it's an adjustment layer, and it comes with a mask. So it's non-destructive. We didn't have to take a copy of our background layer because we are just seeing this layer through the curve. The curve has not actually changed the picture itself. I think we're desperately running out of time, so I'm thinking I'm going to bump gradients, which was meant to be today, into the next episode, but I'll quickly do a teaser. Let's just reset this curve before I do that. Now there are several things we're going to cover off in gradients. We're going to be looking at the gradient tool itself. We'll also be looking at gradients as an adjustment layer, but for now, just as a quick introduction, so I've covered some of it off, we're going to add a gradient map. Within the gradient map, if you click on the properties panel here, if you don't see properties, by the way, window properties, in the properties, if you click here, you get the gradient dialog box. It's currently set to foreground to background, and my foreground color was actually quite dark from what we were playing with before with the curves. But I'll draw your attention to, if I can find them, photographic. They're in legacy and they are called photographic. There they are, toning. Let's move this just to one side a second. And there's several tones, and you can actually go through them, and there's a lot of nice effects there for your photography. Some not so nice as well. And how these work is that, and we'll be looking at this in detail next time, you can add stops, and at each stop you can add a colour, and those stops are on a bar from black to white. So where you put those stops and what colours you put in them is how it impacts on the screen. So I suggest you have a look at that and have a play. I'm going to leave it on that particular one, sepia 1, because I like that one. And you can change the blend mode to colour to make it a little bit more subtle, and play with some of the other blend modes anyway. And of course you can also adjust the opacity of it coming through. We'll pick this up next time, but that's a gradient map. You can identify from dark through to light as many little points as you want, and you can attribute a colour to that. You can even do a rainbow with that. And that's it. I'm going to go now and have another cup of tea. Please don't forget to click on that subscribe button and ring that bell to be notified of future videos. And if it warrants a thumbs up, give it a thumbs up, thank you. If it doesn't warrant a thumbs up, give it a thumbs up, thank you. And let me know how you're getting on with the series and any questions you've got in the comments below, and I'll get round to answering everyone as soon as possible. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.